So apparently Sam and Frodo are gay. Huh. Who knew? We have this article here. Queer readings of The Lord of the Rings are not accidents. Yeah, sure they're not. Hello and welcome to my channel. I am the Anti-Woke Warrior. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. Make sure you're still subscribed. Watching the video to the very end and sharing the video are the best ways to beat the algorithm. As you can see, the algorithm does beat the crap out of me. So I've been doing this for years now and I only have a few hundred subscribers. So please help me out in that regard if you would. Greatly appreciate it. Oh, and before I get started on the video, I do want to let you know that I'm not going to be making very many videos the rest of this month. This is probably going to be the last one that comes out for at least a few days because I ran into issues with the previous video with copyright, and then just have my day job has been so busy. It's going to be so busy this coming month. But let's go ahead and get started on this video. So we got this article here by, okay, so it's by Molly Ostertag. Molly Ostertag is gay. She's married to Noelle Stevenson. Noelle Stevenson is also known to be progressive. They're both known very much for their progressive comic books. They win awards for their progressive comic books. They're so amazingly wonderful. They're pushing the boundaries of what we understand as human beings to be acceptable. They're just basically pushing their lifestyle onto the rest of us, forcing the rest of us to adopt their way of living. Now, a few months ago, I put out the video regarding the Lord of the Rings series that's coming out on Amazon, and said it's going to be woke trash because it's going to be woke trash. And a lot of people argued with me in the comments, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. But this article is coming out now. Why? Well, gee, we have this series on Amazon coming out because they want to push this progressivism into these series and make you think it's okay, it's perfectly acceptable to be progressive in these series. That's why they're doing this. The fact of the matter is Tolkien didn't really write about relationships. Not really. He certainly didn't write about sex. And the defining factor of a homosexual relationship as compared to a heterosexual relationship is the type of sex you're having. I was 12 in 2003 when The Return of the King was in theaters, and Frodo kissing Sam goodbye as he left Middle-earth made me sob like my heart was being ripped out without understanding why. Oh, you poor baby. Outside of the safe darkness of the theater in the Mordor-like wasteland of middle school, the movies were synonymous with the favorite insult of the time, gay. Where did you go to middle school at? Where do you live? This is ridiculous. They were called gay. Look, I went to high school before Lord of the Rings came out, the movies. Not before the book. Be really old then. Before the movies came out, before the Hobbit movie came out, I played Dungeons and Dragons avidly. And I was never referred to as gay because of my interest in Dungeons and Dragons. Ever once. So I find this hard to believe. Not to mention, in the early 2000s, let's go ahead and read on, and I'll explain another incident for you here. Brokeback Mountain wouldn't come out for 2 more years, and none of us had seen a movie on the big screen where men hold each other, comfort each other, kiss each other's foreheads. Really? Torch Song Trilogy came out in 88. The Birdcage was 93. There were plenty of other gay movies in the 80s and 90s. We have a whole, here's a visual list of different gay movies. A lot of these are probably newer than Lord of the Rings, but a lot of these are also older than Lord of the Rings. And you did see men comforting each other, men holding each other, men kissing each other in movies. Not to mention, hey, Will and Grace, when did that start? I believe it was 98. In 98, Will and Grace was a thing. Yeah, it was on the big screen, but you act like homosexuality was not a thing before Lord of the Rings. It's not even true. Early 2000s preteen America was a time of gay jokes, of no homo, of mocking voices and slurs and secret punitive violence enacted in the locker room against anyone who had a whiff of otherness. In that world, the Lord of the Rings trilogy stood out as deeply earnest and therefore vulnerable. No. You're talking about your middle school, your junior high school days when children are discovering their sexuality. And I don't believe this was going on at that time anyway, because I know I went to college in the early 2000s. At one point I made a statement to one of my other students. I said, that's gay. And she got offended. Why are you saying that? Why are you using that insult? I don't mean it's homosexual. I mean it's sissy. That's all that I mean with that. So she was like against this. And you're telling me this is just commonplace in your progressive city where you grew up. I'm sure it was a progressive city. Yeah, I find your claims here to be difficult to swallow. But even if there were preteens and early teenagers going around saying no homo and all that stuff, yeah, that's kind of typical for that age. because finally starting to gain their independence, and they want to make sure that they have those boundaries of like, look, I like you, I'll have fun with you, but I'm not gay, okay? Just like chill on that. Don't think that I'm that way. I listened to The Lord of the Rings before I knew how to read. It's written on my DNA. No, it's not. As the first book I really loved, but for a long time I avoided it. For the same reason that I learned not to talk about the movies at school. The accusations of queerness somehow tied into a story about elves, hobbits, and looming evil. No, homosexuality does not exist in The Lord of the Rings. Okay? I'm not an expert in this. I'm going to tell you that right now. Even though I love medieval fantasy, thank you, Tolkien, for revolutionizing the genre. You made my life much more enjoyable than it otherwise would have been. But you avoid talking about it because there's queerness in it. I find that hard to believe. You avoid talking about it because you don't want to be a nerd. I've seen pictures of her. She's a nerd, and we see this in our modern times. We gotta be progressive. We gotta do it. We gotta be non-racist. We gotta be non-sexist. We gotta be non-prejudiced against anybody. And I get that. It makes sense that we don't want to harm people or hold people down for superficial qualities that they have. But I noticed something in my lifetime. There's a rise in the number of people who are homosexual. Now you might be saying, hey, that rise is just the number of people that you know, or the number of people that are coming out. They were hiding it before. Like, no, I don't think it's that. I think it's just has anything to do with anything other than the fact that we keep talking about it. We keep putting it out there. We keep pushing it. Hey, be gay. It's okay. Hey, being gay is all right. Hey, yeah, you might be gay. You're probably gay. Hey, you're queer. Like 28,000% of the population is gay. So I think that is what's actually happening. Is the more people see this, the more this is pushed on people, the more they think they are that thing, whether or not they actually are. The essay is whoever defined a classic as a book that has never finished what it was to say. And The Lord of the Rings is certainly a classic. Revisiting the book in the last year as someone who has been out for many years and who is deeply engaged in making and consuming queer stories. Like I said, she writes queer stories. She writes progressive stories. I was amazed to find a same-sex love story in the heart of the narrative. No, you didn't. You didn't find that. There are many relationships between men in the book. Most of them platonic. Merry and Pippin are cousins. Well, I would hope they would have a platonic relationship then. And banter like cousins. They fondly tease their other cousin, Frodo, and talk down to working-class Sam. Gandalf takes on a sometimes kind, sometimes frustrated grandfatherly role to the hobbits. Boromir and Faramir have an intense brotherhood and have complex feelings about the loyalty owed to their king, Aragorn. These relationships are high drama, powerful examples of male friendship and family, but they do not read as intentionally romantic, and while fan interpretation is a diverse, wonderful thing, this essay is focused on authorial intent. Yeah, but you don't know the author's intent. You can't ask him that, and you're going to go ahead and speculate on it. So it's fan interpretation. This is fan interpretation that you're accusing is authorial intent. But, typical, these progressives lie. They have to lie to press their ideology. The exception is Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee, the ring bearer with an impossible burden. His loyal gardener and the bond between them that ends up saving their world. Tolkien based Frodo and Sam's relationship on ones he had seen and experienced in World War I. That between a usually upper-class officer and his Batman, a usually lower-class man who served as his bodyguard, personal assistant, and constant companion. This basis does not preclude romance. There's at least one novel about a Batman and his officer having a romantic relationship. Look Down in Mercy. Yeah, so that proves it right there. There's a book that was written about an officer and his Batman. That proves that Tolkien was writing this same way. Totally, 100%. I don't need to see anything else. These people. And many accounts of queer soldiers have found they could, while facing nightmarish conditions in the trenches, live out relationships that would have been impossible at home. Do you want to maybe bring up some examples of this happening? Or do you just want to claim it's true? Here, let me claim something that's true here for you. Men in stressful situations, life-threatening situations where your life is more likely to end, whether those situations last for days, weeks, months, years, they will turn to comfort from each other because they don't have the comfort of a woman to give to them. We all want that comfort of a woman because it reminds us, if I could speak all of a sudden, reminds us of our mothers. But hey, in a pinch, a man will have to do sometimes. if I were in a situation where my life were in danger, then yeah, I might be a little bit more affectionate towards my male companions. Frodo and Sam begin as many great period romances do. Do they really? With a class difference. Frodo is Sam's employer, and the distance between them in class and education is clear in early scenes. But as the story progresses, Frodo sees new sides of Sam in his impromptu poetry, his fascination with elves and stories, and his bravery. For his part, Sam is devoted to Frodo, discovering the depths of his devotion along the journey. He is flustered around Frodo, blushing when spoken to, holding and gently stroking his hands, face, and hair in various situations, and constantly expressing his loyalty. Okay, well, maybe that's just Hobbit mannerisms. Maybe that's what Tolkien was trying to put in here. The notion that hobbits behave differently than humans. Maybe that was his authorial intent. As in any classic romance, through shared hardship, they grow to become the most important people to each other. Well, there you go. That explains the entirety of their relationship right there. The entirety of their affection. Boom. Done. Article done. Yet it goes on. Samwise Gamgee, my dear hobbit, indeed. Sam, my dearest hobbit, friend of friends, Frodo says to Sam midway through The Two Towers. Peter Jackson's excellent movies interject tension between the pair as Frodo is corrupted by the ring, a choice that adds cinematic drama. But in the book, all the enemies exist outside the safety they find in each other, and a striking amount of description is devoted to their relationship. When Frodo is grievously injured, it is Sam, rather than any of Frodo's relatives present, who stays by his side night and day. Sam gazes at Frodo in Ithilien, noting his beauty, and thinks to himself, I love him. They hold each other on the long trek to Mordor. Tolkien said in a letter that he was probably most moved by the scene when Frodo goes to sleep on Sam's breast. On a different night, Sam comforts Frodo with his arms and body, and they are pretty much constantly holding hands in the dead marshes through Shelob's lair, and while they sleep in Mordor. Yeah, it'd probably be a good idea to hold hands while you're walking through the dead marshes, in case one of you slips and falls into a bog. What you see is they have a friendship that goes very deep, and these types of friendships are more common in other countries than they are in the United States. You're writing from a United States perspective. I was in Italy, walked out of a building with my buddy who was living there, and I looked down the street and there's these two girls walking arm in arm. They had their arms locked together, and they're kind of huddled together, talking to each other, whispering. I'm like, hey dude, look, lesbians. And he's like, no dude, that's just how they do it here. So yeah, this type of affection is more common in other countries, especially in Europe. And people have all sorts of different ways of showing affection for each other that don't involve a romantic appreciation for one another. They just really do appreciate each other. And as far as how his family members didn't step up and help him, I think that just shows the level of devotion that his family has to Frodo. As I recall, what little snippets we get is Bilbo wasn't really close with the family either. And I would say the same thing about me. I would prefer to have close relationships outside of my family. My family has been so cruel to me over the years that I wouldn't expect them to step up and help me in my time of need. But anyway, Tolkien describes Sam as a small creature defending its mate. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that's literal. You said right here, he describes. Small creatures defend their mates fiercely. When he protects Frodo from the monstrous Shelob, and when Sam thinks Frodo is dead, all his life had fallen in ruin. When Frodo is captured and imprisoned at the top of the tower, Sam finds him by improvising a song about hope and starlight that a naked, tortured Frodo weakly answers. When they wake after the quest is over, they're lying next to each other in the same bed. They kiss at least 4 times. Another time it's specified that they don't kiss, which has interesting implications. And when they return to the Shire, Sam moves into Bag End with Frodo, no longer a servant, but an equal and a constant companion. Yes, a constant companion because of the shared hardship they went through. Our modern day's notions of what makes somebody gay or straight are very different from what Tolkien was dealing with. That's what I think this boils down to. Let's read this little comic here we have. Frodo's face was peaceful. The marks of fear and care had left it, but it looked old and beautiful. Not that Sam Gamgee put it that way to himself. He shook his head as if finding words useless and murmured, I love him. He's like that, and sometimes it shines through somehow. But I love him whether or not. Yeah, so there was an age disparity between the two, I think 20 years. As I recall, like Sam was 30 and Frodo was 50 when they went on the quest. No, that doesn't mean that that they can't get together romantically. That does happen. It happened to my parents. My father was literally old enough to be my mother's father. But it's just rare. That's another, nail in the coffin to point out that these two are not lovers, that they are just close friends who have a deep affection for each other for many different reasons. I don't know if I'm going to go through this whole thing. Here's another little comic. Sam half lifted his master and hugged him to his breast. Frodo opened his eyes. Am I dreaming? He muttered. But the other dreams were horrible. You're not dreaming at all. I've given up hope almost. I couldn't find you. Well, you have now, Sam, dear Sam, said Frodo, and he lay back in Sam's gentle arms, closing his eyes. Like a child at rest when night fears are driven away by some loved voice or hand, Sam felt that he could sit like that in endless happiness, but it was not allowed. He kissed Frodo's forehead. Come, wake up, Mr. Frodo, he said, trying to sound as cheerful as he had when he drew back the curtains at Bag End on a summer's morning. So this is just more rhetoric from the progressives trying to push this notion that we need to have diversity in the Lord of the Rings, especially the Lord of the Rings we see on film, and that includes having homosexual relationships. Like I said, Tolkien didn't write about sexual relationships. As far as I'm aware, he avoided that subject matter. The Hobbit, especially, but the Lord of the Rings as well, were written so that children could enjoy them, and they were made into animated films that were geared towards children. I saw both of those movies before I saw either of the live action, or any of the, sorry, there's three, right? Any of the three live action films, or if you count the Hobbit, the six live action films. So this is not something that has any legs to it, but these progressives are going to eat it up. They'll just devour it, thinking, yeah, this is the truth. We need to have this diversity. There were black people in Lord of the Rings, and there were Asian people in Lord of the Rings, and there were Hispanic people in Lord of the Rings, and there were Native Americans in Lord of the Rings, and you're going to see that in this Amazon series. Amazon made a proclamation. It had to have that diversity in any show that it makes. What else do we have going on here? Anything of interest? So we have like Bilbo and Frodo's home at Bag End is described by other hobbits as a queer place, and its folks are queerer. Yeah, queer means strange, abnormal. The adjective which had a strong connotation of homosexuality by the late 1800s. Okay. Actually, it was more like the 1900s. It was like a few years before the year 1900 that it was first recorded to have been used to refer to homosexual. So it doesn't have a strong connection as late as the 1800s. It was like recorded by one person of power, in a position of power. That's why that was recorded. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known about it. And, in my life, I don't remember queer being used until I was older. That's just from my point of view. But
no, they're just you.
Queer?
Yeah, and that's another thing. I resent you people using that word. That's our word for making fun of you. We need it.
So she's just reaching. She does bring up some really good points about the writing, how it does, by our modern day sensibilities, seem very homoerotic. We would write stories like this about people if they were gay. Yeah, today we could see that. Things are different now, though. The Lord of the Rings was written over many years. Tolkien was obsessed, and he studied this stuff extensively. The Lord of the Rings the first book did not get published until 1954. So you're dealing with the 1940s, 1930s, when Tolkien is developing these notions about how things should be. I think this is the final comic here. Where are you going, master? Cried Sam, though he at least understood what was happening. To the heavens, Sam, said Frodo. And I can't come. No, Sam, not yet, anyway. No further than the heavens. Do not be too sad, Sam. You cannot be always torn in two. You will have to be one and whole for many years. Yeah, well, this is kind of provocative in the way that it's written. Sam is married at this point. He married Rosie. He loved Rosie. He wanted to marry Rosie. In the past, though, human beings, I'm not going to bring up any examples of this, but humans, their spousal relationship was not always their closest relationship. This is well known. And they often did love someone deeply who was not their spouse. The spouse was there to be a part of their family, the family that they grew. And often, they would actually have these strong relationships with the same sex child. They would have these really strong connections, these really strong bonds where they would show affection by kissing, and they would cry over each other's pains because they just understood that empathy. We don't have that level of empathy in the United States these days. So I think this is just a matter of cultural time variation. is really what it comes down to. I could be totally wrong, and maybe, hey, look, the Lord of the Rings is all just so much of queer elves and fairies dancing around and naked in the woods. But I'm going to go with no. It was more about the adventure of a fairy tale through time, and it was much darker than the normal fairy tales that we see today. Although those original fairy tales were really, really dark. Yeah, Tolkien didn't write sex. He didn't write politics. He didn't write sex. He felt those were unnecessary in his writings. You look at fairy tales; they're not about sex, and they're not about politics. Sex it does feature into fairy tales in the form of, this person had a child with this person, etc., things like that. But they don't go into details about, hey, look, these deep loving relationships that are romantic in nature, that are amorous in nature. So that is what I have for this time. Please like, comment, share again, and I will see you in the next video.